Ooh, let's do this. Right. So let me just, I'll double check that you can hear me. Can you see me? Let's pull this a little bit over this way. Need to be a bit more central. That's better. Okay. Good. Alright, I'm happy with that. Right. Can we hear me? Testing, testing. Yeah, we can hear me. Perfect. Alright. Where did my story? Okay. So tonight we enter into older stories, even older than before. So I have a couple of books on myths and legends. So I'm going to read a few selected tales from each of the books, myths and legends. So this book is by Thomas Bulfinch, and the other one is retold by Anthony Horowitz. Okay. So today, or tonight rather, we enter into the older stories, the ones that were never meant for comfort. In this live sleep reading, I'll be sharing a collection of ancient myths and legends, including Pandora's box, Persephone's abduction, Narcissus and Echo, and others. So do stick around to hear it. These are stories of curiosity, of caution, of transformation, and consequence, where small choices echo into something much larger, and where even beauty and innocence can lead somewhere unexpected. But told slowly, softly, and with space to breathe, they become something else entirely. A quiet descent into stillness. If your mind is restless at night, drawn to overthinking, for searching for meaning, these myths give it somewhere to go. So try it out until the thoughts begin to fade. Okay, let's go. So the first myth we will have the 7 pomegranate seeds, also known as the abduction of Persephone. So just let everyone get comfortable, get relaxed. Okay. Demeter was one of the more gentle goddesses who inhabited Mount Olympus. Not for her were the jealous rages of Hera, the whip-like chastity of Artemis, or the burning passions of Aphrodite. Demeter was a goddess of agriculture and of marriage. Her hair was the colour of wheat at harvest time, and her eyes were a pastel blue. She delighted in bright colours, often wearing brilliant ribbons and carrying a golden torch. Only once did she really lose her temper. This was when she discovered that the beautiful trees in a grove that was sacred to her were being cut down by a foolhardy young man called Erishphon. Perhaps he was some sort of early town planner, but whatever his reason for his act of vandalism, Demeter appeared to him disguised as a mortal and asked him if he would be so kind as to stop. His answer was short and unfriendly. Then Demeter assumed her own form and punished him in a way that was truly horrible. She condemned him to remain hungry forever, no matter how much he ate. From that moment on, he seldom stopped. At dinner that same night, he astonished his parents by eating not only his food, but theirs too, as well as that of their 17 guests. In the weeks that followed, he ate so much that his weeping father was forced to throw him out of the house, no longer able to afford his keep. And yet, the more he ate, the thinner and hungrier he got, until, in the end, he became a beggar, shuffling pathetically along in rags, still stuffing himself with the filth he found in the streets. This, then, was the full extent of Demeter's anger, but most people would agree that Erishthaphon only got what he deserved, for the unnecessary destruction of a tree is a terrible crime. Demeter had a daughter called Kare. Later on, her name was changed to Persephone, whom she loved more than anything in the world. Unfortunately, another of the gods also loved the girl, although in a very different way. This was Hades, the shadowy lord of the underworld, the god of death. Hades had spent virtually his whole life underground, and his skin was pale and cold. No light shone in his eyes that had seldom seen the sun, and yet he had seen an image of Kore, magically reflected in an ebony pool, and he had lost his heart to her. So great was his love that he took a rare leave of absence from the underworld, travelling to Olympus. There he came before Zeus and demanded that he give Kore to him as a wife. The demand somewhat embarrassed the king of the gods, for although he did not want to offend Hades, who was his brother, Zeus could not let him have what he wanted, for Kore was his daughter. He had fallen in love with Demeter some years before, and Kore had been the result. If he were to send the girl to the underworld, Demeter would never forgive him. Moreover, it would hardly be fair to condemn his own daughters to such a gloomy place, for the kingdom of Hades was such a dull and dismal land. But on the other hand, what was he to say to Hades, who was older than he? And I'll think about it, Zeus said, and promptly forgot all about it. When it became clear that he was not going to get a satisfactory answer from Zeus, Hades decided to take things into his own hands. He did not say I could have the girl, he reasoned to himself, but nor did he say that I could not. And surely, if something is not forbidden, then it must be allowed. Of course it must, in which case Kore shall become Persephone, and as Persephone she will be my wife. And so it was that 2 days later Kore found herself kidnapped by the grim god of death. She was living in Sicily at the time, and was out in the fields with some of her friends. Collecting wildflowers for a feast that same evening, noticing a particular bright Narcissus, she leant down to pick it, and suddenly the ground trembled as the blood drained from her face, and her friends screamed, dropping their baskets and scattering in all directions. A great chasm appeared in front of her, yawning like a black mouth. Desperately, Corey tried to keep her balance, but then a white hand that smelt of damp earth stretched out, grabbed hold of her, pulling her forward. With a hopeless cry, she tumbled forward, disappearing into the chasm. The ground trembled again, then closed up as suddenly as it had opened. Only a jagged line zigzagging through the flowers showed what had happened. When Demeter discovered that Corey was missing, her grief was overwhelming. Almost overnight she changed. No longer did she wear ribbons and bright colours. No more was her laughter heard in the fields. Covering herself with a dark veil, she flew round the world on a search that would take her 9 days and 9 nights. Not once did she stop for food or for a drink, not even to rest. Her only thought was for her daughter. She visited Sicily, Colonus, Hermione, Crete, Pisa, Lerna. Nobody had seen the girl, nor was there any sign that she had been there. At last she went in desperation to Helios, the god, who every day followed the sun, riding across the heavens in a golden chariot, drawn by 4 white horses. Nothing ever escaped the eye of Helios. Soaring in an ark, high above the world, he could see everything. And what he had to tell Demeter chilled her heart. You must forget Corey, he said. Corey exists no longer. Look, if you will, for Persephone, destroyer of men, for that is what she has become, as the wife of the king of death. Yes, Hades has stolen her from you. Never again will you see her. Where she is now, deep in the shadows of the underworld, she is lost even from the sight of Helios. At once, Demeter went to Zeus, white with anger and haggard after 9 days of fasting. She was almost unrecognizable, and the king of the gods squirmed in front of her. I didn't say Hades could take her, he muttered. Did you say he couldn't? Well, I want her back, Zeus. You will return her to me. I can't, the king of the gods almost wept with frustration. You know the rules. If she has eaten so much as a mouthful of the food of the dead, she is stuck in the underworld forever. She won't have eaten. She can't have eaten. And anyways, Zeus went on, you know Hades, there's no arguing with him. He has to have his own way. Very well, Demeter cried. Until my daughter is returned to me, no tree on earth will yield fruit, no plants will grow. The soil will remain barren, the animals will starve. Such is the curse of an unhappy mother. Bring her back, Zeus, or mankind will perish. So began a year of unrelenting famine. The crops withered, and even the grass turned brown and rotted. As Demeter had promised, the animals, unable to find fodder, died by the hundred, their bloated carcasses dotting the arid landscape. At last, the situation became so desperate that Hermes, the messenger god, was sent down to the underworld to bring Persephone back. Never, Hades exclaimed. I love her. I will never relinquish her. But does she love you? Hermes asked. She will learn to in time. But there is no time, Hermes said. Her mother, Demeter, is destroying the world in her grief. If you do not release Persephone, mankind will come to an end. Why should the extinction of mankind be of any concern to the god of death? Hades asked. Because even death depends on life. Nothing can continue without it. The king of the underworld fought long and hard, but then he nodded his head. You speak the truth, he said. Very well. It seems that I am defeated. My wife, my Persephone, she must go. And he turned his head, bringing his hand up to cover his eyes. When Persephone heard that she was to be returned to the world of the living, she was so happy that she laughed and cried all at the same time. But one of the gardeners of Hades, a man, the name of Ascalaphus, also heard the news, and at once he crept off, and changing into his best clothes, knelt before Hades. "Oh, ghastly and glorious master," he said, rubbing his hands together in front of his chin. "Dread lord of the underworld, grotesque king of the dead, sovereign of the—" "Oh, get on with it," Hades commanded. Of course, of course." The gardener laughed nervously. "I just thought you'd like to know that your wife, the good and delicious Lady Persephone, has tasted the food of the dead." "That's impossible," Hades said. "She has refused to eat since the day I brought her here. Not so much as a crust of bread has passed her lips. I'm sure, but something less than a crust of bread. Noble king, with my own eyes I saw her eat 7 pomegranate seeds in the garden. I saw her." Then the eyes of Hades lit up. "If this is true," he said, "you shall be rewarded." "Rewarded?" Ascalaphus licked his lips. "Well, I didn't do it for the reward, but if there is a reward, well." "Follow her to the surface," Hades said. "Do what must be done." So when Hermes took Persephone with him in his chariot, Ascalaphus rode on the back, unseen by either of them, dreaming of his new career, for he had never liked gardening very much. Perhaps as secretary to Hades, or perhaps as palace librarian, or even, who could say, as the next prince of hell. And no sooner had Demeter received her daughter in a joyful embrace than he stepped forward with a crooked smile. "Persephone has eaten the food of the dead," he cried. "She must return with me to the underworld. There's nothing any of you lot can do about it. It's the law." "Is this true?" Demeter asked. Then tears sprang to Persephone's eyes. She sank to her knees. "Yes, mother," she whispered. "I ate 7 pomegranate seeds, but that was all I ate. Although I was 1 year in that horrible place, that was the only food that passed my lips. Surely it doesn't count. Surely." But by now Demeter was weeping too. "You have eaten the food of the dead," she said. Though mankind will die when they take you from me, there is nothing I can do. When the gods heard what had happened, they held a great conference to discuss what should be done. On the one hand, nobody wanted the world to end, but nor could they allow Persephone to remain in the land of the living. At last, a compromise was reached, and both Persephone and Demeter were called before the throne of Zeus. We've come to an agreement, Zeus explained, and I hope it satisfies you because it really is the best we can do. Listen, what would you say if we allowed Persephone to stay in the world for 6 months of the year, provided she spent the other 6 months with Hades in the underworld? Demeter thought for a moment. Make it 9 months with me and 3 months with Hades, and I will agree, she said. Very well, you've got a deal. At once the famine ended. 9 months later, Persephone went back to begin her spell in the underworld. And although she was never truly a loving wife to Hades, she was never unkind to him. The miserable Ascalaphus never received the reward he had been hoping for Persephone punished him for his treachery by pushing him into a small hole and covering him with an ornamental rockery complete with flowering hibiscus border and fish pond. In this way, he was condemned to spend the rest of eternity, not only in the garden, but under it too. This myth explains why it is that for 3 months every year the cold season comes, and it looks as though the world has gone into mourning. Then the trees lose their leaves, nothing will grow, and like Demeter, we look forward to the spring. For it is only in spring, when Persephone is released from her dark confinement, that the warmth and the colours will return, and we can all, God and man, celebrate the return of life. Okay, on to the next story. Pandora's box. Pandora's box. There are some who say that the original creator of mankind was Prometheus, that he fashioned the first man in the image of the gods using clay and water taken from Panopeus in Phokis. Prometheus was a titan, one of the race of the giants who fought an unsuccessful war against Zeus and the other gods, and it is certainly true that he was a great deal wiser than his brothers, for he alone knew that the war was doomed to failure. He realized that, huge and immensely strong though the Titans undoubtedly were, they also suffered from a common trait amongst the giants. They just weren't very bright. A Titan might tear up a mountain instead of going around it, but he would probably find out later on he was going the wrong way anyway. A Titan might be able to hurl a rock the size of Gibraltar 100 miles or more, but he would invariably miss whatever he was aiming for. On the other hand, of course, the gods were as quick-witted as they were skilled in the art of war. First there was Zeus, the king of Olympus, armed with his devastating thunderbolts. Then there was Poseidon, with his trident, Apollo with his golden arrows, the invisible Hermes. It was an invincible army, and Prometheus could see that his brothers would be lost against it. Lose was what they did. Most of them were sent to a dark and damp prison in the depths of Tartarus. Atlas, perhaps the most famous Titan of all, was condemned to hold up the heavens on his shoulder for all time. But Prometheus, who had let everyone know that he was neutral from the start, got away scot free. That was when he created man. Prometheus loved men in the same way people love their pets. He was immensely proud of everything they did, boasted about them to almost anyone who would listen, and generally fussed over them in every way possible. Instead of feeding them with food, however, he fed them with knowledge, scraps of information that he picked up from Athena, the goddess of wisdom, and his only real friend in Olympus. One day, she would tell him about mathematics, and straight away he would rush down to earth to pass it on. The next day, it might be art or architecture. The day after that, science or engineering. It's strange to think that our entire civilization could have been handed down to us rather in the manner of dog biscuits, but that is how it was. As the years passed and mankind became more intelligent, Zeus, who had been watching all this from his celestial throne, grew uneasy. I am a little worried about these human beings, he remarked to his wife Hera, one day over a goblet of wine. What about them? Hera asked. Well, I just wonder if they're not getting a bit above themselves. Where will it all lead to? That's what I want to know. Today, the rudiments of geometry. Tomorrow, it could be genetic surgery. So, what are you going to do about it? I don't know, but I'm keeping my eye on them. Zeus might have been a jealous god, but he was not cruel. Enough to destroy the newly formed human race. And so mankind continued to flourish. Things came to a head. And one day, in place in a place called Sicyon, the trouble was caused by a question of ownership. Prometheus had taught man to stay on the right side of the gods by regularly sacrificing the best animals from their herds. A special sacrificial bull had been chosen for Zeus at Sicyon, but the question was which part should be reserved for the god, and which parts should the men who had worked hard to raise the animal in the first place be allowed to keep. As usual, Prometheus acted as the mediator in the dispute, but unwisely he decided to play a trick on Zeus. When the bull had been killed and cut up, he took two sacks. In, into one of these, he put all the most succulent portions of meat, the rump and the fillet, the sirloin and the rib, but concealed them beneath the stomach bag, which was all white and rubbery and generally disgusting to look at. Into the other went the bones and the gristle, the eyeballs and the hooves. In short, all the most unappetizing parts of the bull. But these were covered with a layer of fat to make them look as delicious as possible. Then Prometheus took both sacks and knelt before Zeus. "O mighty king," he said, "why should there be any quarrel between you and the little pink creatures who inhabit the world below? Take this matter of sacrifice. It seems that nobody can decide who should get exactly what. Well, as you are the king of Olympus, Why don't you choose for yourself? I have divided the bull between these two sacks. Which one do you want? Zeus, who had never suspected that a Titan could think up such a scheme, was completely deceived. He chose the bones and the fat, and ever since that time the gods have received nothing else from the sacrifice. When he found out how Prometheus had tricked him, however, he was furious. Man may have his steak, he thundered, but he will eat it raw. And with those words, he reached out with one hand and snatched all the fire from the world. It seemed that mankind had got the worst deal after all. Without fire, they could take no pleasure in their food, and once the sun had gone down, they could only stay indoors, huddled under animal skins for warmth. But Prometheus was willing to do anything to help his creation. And one day, while Zeus was out having one of his many affairs, he stole up to Olympus, for he still had one friend in the home of the gods, Athena. Hearing him knocking on a side door, the goddess of wisdom unbolted it and let him in. Then Prometheus rode up to the sun, and using his bare hands, broke off a blazing firebrand. This he carried back to the earth, thrusting it into a giant fennel leaf, and in this way people were once again able to enjoy their meat grill. But this time Prometheus had gone too far. When Zeus heard how he had been defied for a second time, his anger knew no bounds. Prometheus, he cried, you crossed me once and I forgave you because of your loyalty to me in the war of the Titans. But this time there can be no forgiveness. This time you must pay for your crime. And so saying, he seized Prometheus and chained him to a pillar on the freezing slopes of the Caucasian mountains. But if this was not punishment enough, worst was to come. Every morning, a huge vulture landed on the wretched Titan's chest, and even as he screamed in rage and horror, tore out his liver and devoured it. And every night, while Prometheus shivered in the sub zero temperatures, his liver grew whole again. In this way, the horrible torture could be repeated again and again until the end of time. Zeus punished mankind too, but as man had only offended indirectly, his punishment was of another sort. First, he visited the crippled god Hephaestus, who worked at the great forge in Olympus with 20 bellows pumping 24 hours a day. Although ugly and misshapen himself, no blacksmith was more skilled than Hephaestus. I want you to make me a woman, the king of the gods commanded. I want her to be more beautiful than any woman ever seen on the face of the earth. She must be perfect as a goddess. Hephaestus did as he was told. He had only ever disobeyed Zeus once. That had been just before he became the crippled god. Now he fashioned a woman out of clay, moulding her the perfect features with his own hands. He commissioned the four winds to breathe life into her and asked all the goddesses to help dress her in their finest clothes and jewels. The result was Pandora. When Zeus saw the blacksmith's god's work, he was well pleased and instructed Hermes to carry her into the world at once. There she was married to a certain king, Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus, and the only other Titan who had not joined in the war against the gods. Now Epimetheus had been warned never to trust the gifts of Zeus, but seeing the terrible fate that had befallen his brother, he was too afraid to refuse. Moreover, he had to admit that Pandora was beautiful. You'd have had to be mad to think otherwise. When she walked into the room, men fell silent, all eyes turned on her. Whatever she said, people would agree. When she made jokes, the laughter would continue for several minutes. Whatever she did was greeted with applause, and Epimetheus did feel rather proud to be married to her. Unfortunately, the things Pandora said were never really worth listening to, for she was not very intelligent. Her jokes were, in truth, extremely unfunny. She did very little because she was impossibly lazy, and if Epimetheus was glad to be her husband, she made him a poor and unfaithful wife. For this was the revenge of Zeus. He had made her as shallow and as coquettish as she was beautiful, and she was to cause more trouble to mankind than any woman before, or any woman since. For Epimetheus owned a large ebony box, which was kept in a special room in his palace, guarded day and night. In this box he had collected and imprisoned all the things that could harm mankind. It was the one room in the palace that Pandora was forbidden to enter, and naturally, it was the one room that most aroused her curiosity. I bet you keep all sorts of super things in that big black box of yours, she would say in her syrupy voice. Why don't you let your little pandy look inside? It is not for you, my dear, Epimetheus would reply. You should leave well alone. But no, no, my love, no one may open the box. Then you don't love me, Pandora would say, crossing her arms and pouting. And I'm not going to love you anymore. Not ever. They had this conversation many times until the day when Pandora couldn't resist her curiosity any longer. For despite everything Epimetheus had told her about the box, she still believed that it contained some special treat that he was holding back from her. I'll show him, the old bossy boot, she muttered to herself. Waiting until Epimetheus was out, she managed to talk her way past the guards and into the room. She had stolen the key from beside his bed, and nobody thought to stop her. Was she not, after all, the king's wife and mistress of the house? Her whole body trembling, she knelt down beside the box. It was smaller and older than she had expected. It was also a little surprising, not to say upsetting, that the padlock which it fastened it should be in the shape of a human skull. But she was certain it would contain treasure, such as would make all her own diamonds and pearls seem like mere pebbles, treasure that would make her the envy of the world. She turned the key and opened the box. And at once, all the spites and problems that Epimetheus had for so long kept locked up exploded into the world. Old age, hard work, sickness, they flew out in a great cloud of buzzing, stinging, biting insects. It was as if Pandora had accidentally split the atom. One moment she was standing there with a foolish grin on her face. The next, she was screaming in the heart of an intense darkness that had in seconds stripped her of her beauty and brought her out in 1,000 boils. At that moment, All the things that make life difficult today streamed out of Pandora's box and into the world. Old age, hard work, sickness, vice, anger, envy, lust, covetousness, spite, sarcasm, cynicism, violence, intolerance, injustice, infidelity, famine, drought, pestilence, war, religious persecution, apartheid, taxation, inflation, pollution, unemployment, fascism, racism, sexism, terrorism, communism, nepotism, cubism, patriotism, nihilism, totalitarianism, plagiarism, vandalism, tourism, paranoia, schizophrenia, kleptomania, claustrophobia, xenophobia, hypochondria, insomnia, megalomania, narrow mindedness, thoughtfulness, selfishness, bribery, corruption, censorship, gluttony, pornography, delinquency, vulgarity, bureaucracy, complacency, obesity, acne, diplomatic immunity, traffic congestion, party political broadcast, urban development, modern architecture, fast food, mosaic, dolphinariums, organized crime, advertising, alcoholism, drug addiction, monosodium glutamate, nicotine, nuclear waste, data processing, fanaticism, insanity, drizzle, elephant's feet, waste paper baskets, and much, much more. At the last moment, Epimetheus managed to slam down the lid, by which time only one thing was left in the box: hope, which is just as well, for with all the problems that Pandora had released into the world, where would we be without it? Okay. And on to the next story. I'll just have a little breather. So we have a couple of comments from Booga Wooga and Valknut. Valknut says, "Hello, how are you?" Good, thank you. So the next story we'll have is Echo and Narcissus. So this is a very interesting one. Let's see if you can spot the moral of the story. Echo and Narcissus. Echo was a beautiful nymph, fond of the woods and hills, where she devoted herself to the woodland sports. She was a favourite of Diana and attended her in the chase. But Echo had one failing. She was fond of talking and, whether in chat or argument, would have the last word. One day Juno was seeking her husband, who she had reason to fear was amusing himself among the nymphs. Echo, by her talk, contrived to detain the goddess till the nymphs made their escape. When Juno discovered it, she passed sentence upon Echo in these words: "You shall forfeit the use of that tongue with which you have cheated me, except for that one purpose you are so fond of. Reply. You shall still have the last word, but no power to speak first." This nymph was Narcissus, a beautiful youth. As he pursued the chase upon the mountains, she loved him and followed his footsteps. Oh, how she longed to address him in the softest accents and win him to converse. But it was not in her power. She waited with impatience for him to speak first, and had her answer ready. One day the youth, being separated from his companion, shouted aloud, "Who is here?" Echo replied, "Here." Narcissus looked around, but seeing no one, called out, "Come." Echo answered, "Come." As no one came, Narcissus called again, "Why do you shun me?" Echo asked the same question. "Let us join one another," said the youth. The maid answered with all her heart in the same words, and hastened to the spot, ready to throw her arms about his neck. He started back, exclaiming, "Hands off! I would rather die than you should have me." "Have me?" said she, but it was all in vain. He left her, and she went to hide her blushes in the recesses of the woods. From that time forth, she lived in caves and among mountain cliffs. Her form faded with grief, till at last all her flesh shrank away. Her bones were changed into rocks, and there was nothing left of her but her voice. With that, she is still ready to reply to anyone who calls her, and keeps up her old habit of having the last word. Narcissus's cruelty in this case was not the only instance. He shunned all the rest of the nymphs, as he had done poor Echo. One day a maiden who had in vain endeavoured to attract him uttered a prayer that he might sometime or other feel what it was to love and meet no return of affection. The avenging goddess heard and granted the prayer. There was a clear fountain, with water like silver, to which the shepherds never drove their flocks, nor the mountain goats resorted, nor any of the beasts of the forest. Neither was it defaced with fallen leaves or branches, but the grass grew fresh around it, and the rocks sheltered it from the sun. Hither came one day the youth, fatigued with hunting, heated and thirsty. He stooped down to drink, saw his own image in the water. He thought it was some beautiful water spirit living in the fountain. He stood gazing with admiration at those bright eyes, those locks curled like the locks of Bacchus or Apollo, the rounded cheeks, the ivory neck, the parted lips, the glow of health and exercise over all. He fell in love with himself. He brought his lips near to take a kiss. He plunged his arms into to embrace the beloved object. It fled at the touch, but returned again after a moment and renewed the fascination. He could not tear himself away. He lost all thought of food or rest, while he hovered over the brink of the fountain, gazing upon his own image. He talked with the supposed spirit. "Why, beautiful being, do you shun me? Surely my face is not one to repel you. The nymphs love me, and you yourself look not indifferent upon me. When I stretch forth my arms, you do the same, and you smile upon me and answer my beckonings with the like." His tears fell into the water and disturbed the image. As he saw it depart, he exclaimed, "Stay, I entreat you. Let me at least gaze upon you, if I may not touch you." With this, and much more of the same kind, he cherished the flame, that consumed him, so that by degrees he lost his colour, his vigour, and the beauty which formerly had so charmed the nymph Echo. She kept near him. However, when he exclaimed, "Alas! Alas!" she answered him with the same words. He pined away and died. And when his shade passed the Stygian river, it leaned over the boat to catch a look of himself in the waters. The nymphs mourned for him, especially the water nymphs, and when they smote their breasts, Echo smote hers also. They prepared a funeral pile, and would have burned the body, but it was nowhere to be found. But in this place a flower, purple within, and surrounded with white leaves, which bears the name and preserves the memory of Narcissus. Milton alludes the story of Echo and Narcissus in the Lady's Song in Comus. She is seeking her brother in the forest and sings to attract their attention. Sweet Echo, sweetest nymph, that livest unseen with thy airy shell, by slow meanders margent green, and in the violet embroidered vale, where the lovelorn nightingale nightly to thee her sad song mourneth well. Canst thou not tell me of a gentle pair, that likely thy Narcissus are? Oh, if thou have hid them in some flowery cave, tell me but where. Sweet queen of parley, daughter of the sphere, so mayst thou be translated to the skies, and give resounding grace to all heaven's harmonies. And that ends the tale of Echo and Narcissus. So, thank you all for tuning in for that one. Please do check out some of the other videos, and I will be back with some more tales if you liked this. So, sending you all brightest blessings and namaste and good night. Sleep well.